topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. It's Tuesday morning and so thrilled to be here with you all. So I want to check in with each and every one of you and kind of think about, is there a time where you're missing signs, when you're mentally fatigued or sliding into reactive mode? Or when is that one time, like, you come back and say, oh, I wish I didn't speak, or I wish I didn't take that action in the heat of the moment? I think so. Most of us do that. And it is bringing in that awareness. And the key over here is that understanding ourselves. So these are some of the things we'll be talking about today with our wonderful guests. So let's bring Suzanne in.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Thrilled to have you, Suzanne. So usually we kind of begin at the beginning, do you recall any moment or a person who left a positive mark on you when you were a child or young?
Such a great question. And I want to kind of recall back to my childhood. So when I was growing up, my parents we'd have dinner at the dinner table every single night. And so my parents would, of course, talk up to all of my sisters. So there was 4 of us, and we would run through our days. And so if we had a good day, everybody celebrated. If we had a bad day, let's say we got a bad grade on a test, or we something happened, we didn't make particular team. Essentially, what we would do is we would debrief. And actually, my mom, who was the therapist, would say, share your feelings. And we'd get our feelings out. And of course, doing that in a family was important to build a support system. And then my dad would ask a question, which I think I still use this question to this day, is what are you going to do differently tomorrow? And so that has really stood the test of time. I still, go to the dinner table with my family when I need to get that support, feel the feelings I need to feel when I've had a bad day, and then figure out how I'm going to do things differently the next day.
Such a powerful question. And so many times what happens is in today's busy schedule, maybe, both the parents are coming in late, or even if you're single,
Right.
or like sitting with friends, you're sitting in front of the TV, and then that takes away
Yes.
the advantage of sitting together and having that human to human connection. So it definitely is clear, Suzanne, that you grew up in a very strong family. So as you grew up, did you have any aspirations or dreams what you wanted to become when you would grow up?
It's a great question. I think that for me, just like every little kid, I wanted to be president. For a while there, I wanted to be a priest. I had all sorts of different possibilities in front of them. And so never really thought that there was anything I couldn't do. The thing that really stuck was I was very interested in politics and loved reading about presidential leaders. Or leaders from across the globe. So it could be Churchill, it could be Alexander the Great. It didn't really matter. And so I loved kind of reading about those political leaders and how they got a ton of people to follow them, how they kind of built that influence. And so that was kind of my passion when I was young.
And How did it pan out as you became an adult?
Great question. I have actually run for office a couple of different times, and so that has definitely been one of the things I am most proud of is kind of the opportunity to serve other people. I've also, since then have been involved in politics. So I was a lobbyist early on in my career, and now I work with nonprofits and businesses as well as individuals kind of pursue their passions around policy change. And so I still feel like I'm in the middle of it, not necessarily in an elected office, but I certainly am in the middle of politics and trying to work the system in order to improve the lives of people.
Mm, that is so phenomenal because you're serving people, you're helping
Mhm.
them get where they want to go. And so, what happens is that whether it doesn't matter whether you're in the corporate, as a leader, running an organization, or you're a professional doing an individual contributor work, or you're a student, or wherever you're at, so many times what happens is that so many professionals and people or doctors, anyone, they miss out on so many signs. And they slide into reactive
Yes.
mode very fast. So what
Mhm.
happens then? What is happening that click, right? Our amygdala goes straight into action so fast.
Mhm.
What could they do in that moment?
It's interesting. This is one of the reasons why I've really paired, whether it's a policy class I'm teaching or a class on ethical leadership or even a social entrepreneurship class with emotional intelligence, because I think they go together. Even though they call emotional intelligence a soft skill, I think it's very hard to do. And to your point, in this day and time, I think it's harder to do. We don't necessarily have as many leaders who model that behavior. Um, Vivek Murphy, also former Surgeon General, said we have a loneliness epidemic. So, to the point that you made earlier, I think people are disconnected from each other. We came out of that COVID cocoon and we kind of lost kind of our sense of connection with each other. So, I did it before COVID, but I think it's even more important right now to double down on emotional intelligence. And so, one of the first things I do is just bring a level of awareness to leaders, whether they're students or they're our execs, that kind of talks through what emotional intelligence is. Most people think it is just at the self awareness level and just knowing yourself that that's enough. But as you know, as you've taught through the podcast, it's then shifting from self awareness to self regulation. Then once you know yourself really well, then you can actually shift to social awareness and kind of commanding a room, trying to get teams to work together in a fluid motion. And then, as I was mentioning earlier about the politicians, you then figure out social influence. How do you get people to follow you? How do you have a good
Mm,
idea? How do you communicate it? How do you build buy in so that other people want to follow you? And so, all those things kind of are a roadmap, I think, for any leader to get to closer to who they're supposed to be, their purpose in life. And so,
mhm,
that's why I teach it in pretty much every class and really help people at least get farther along on their journey towards greater emotional intelligence.
mhm. So you've talked about being in politics, helping other people. What led you to becoming a professor?
I come from a long line of teachers. So both of my parents, a number of my aunts were teachers. So
Mm.
I come from a long line of educators. It's really where I come alive in the classroom. I also jokingly say it's my fountain of youth. So being around all these young people, millennials, Gen Zers, it definitely keeps me alive and keeps me connected to what's happening in the now. And so I love teaching. It's really one of my favorite things to do. It's my favorite place to be in front of a classroom.
Mm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I can relate to it. I used to be in academia some time back, and when you see, as you're talking on the fountain of youth and the youngsters, right? Like the way they're looking at the world is so different than
Hmm.
people who are a little seasoned or people who may have a little disjointed perspective look at the. And of course, I'm not saying that youngsters are not jaded, or fear is not there, and yet there is just something different about
Right.
that curiosity and openness. So
Mhm.
when as we are talking about, you have worked with leaders, do you recall a time when self-awareness changed the outcome for them?
So to me, self-awareness is really about having a direct connection to who you are, where your gifts are, and then how you want to apply them into that particular situation. And so the better you are at that, the more you're self-aware of where, your strengths are, where your blind spots are. We use a technique called Johari's window, so that you even are working on where your mysteries are. So the things you didn't know about yourself, but through the course of life, you learn these new things about yourself. And so part of what I try to do is help people, one, take personality tests and really understanding kind of what their personality is. The second thing is really understanding their triggers, knowing kind of what are some things that trigger them specifically, are kind of hard things that they specifically, cause them to react in ways that may be different than other people. And the other thing is really kind of then communicating those, because it's not enough just to be aware. You then need to communicate that to other people. So one of my favorite techniques, in fact, I was debriefing with a principal of a school, and I presented to her to her teachers a couple of weeks ago, and she told me yesterday that one of the things I use is green, yellow, red. And so essentially, if you, my husband's a pilot, and so he actually taught me this, and I've been using it with others. But essentially, part of your job is to telegraph to other people how you're doing. And so when he gets in the cockpit, he's actually working with someone he's never met before. So they don't have any kind of relationship before this. So they could have had bad sleep the night before. They could have had an argument with their partner. They could have eaten some bad food. And so they may be in the yellow. So that means he can't 100% depend on them to do their job because they're not in their best spot. And so just even telegraphing kind of how you're doing to other people is very helpful. And so I'm either in the green and everything's great, smooth sailing. If I'm in the red, it means I'm not feeling really well, or I've had a bad day, or maybe I'm at the end of the day and I'm tired. And then if I'm in the yellow, I'm kind of in that place where I could get triggered, and the other person needs to help me. So one of the things I love about this system is it really does connect you to a co-pilot where we're all responsible for each other. So it's not enough just to be self aware, it's also your responsibility to help other people through whatever they're being hit with any given day. So to ask other people kind of where they are makes a big difference in their world because they feel seen and heard. But then you're helping them with wherever it is they need to go in that particular day. So I love that technique. And that one's probably the one that stands out the most. And of course, the principal yesterday said that that's still being uttered in the hallways of the school. Where
Hmm.
they're telling each other if they're in the green, yellow, or red.
Yeah, that is definitely a very powerful technique. And
Mhm,
I can definitely relate to it because I use it with my clients for the
mm,
work that
mhm,
as you're reporting back to your boss or something like that, share with them because people don't have time. And a lot of times, as people are joining professions, like in a new job, like, oh, how can I create a system to communicate with my peers or to communicate with my boss or the stakeholders? And I always say that, keep it simple because people know what's red, yellow, green. We all are
mhm.
so aware and so connected with it. So I definitely resonate with what you're sharing. So it's a really good point that you brought in. Now, let's say somebody comes and tells you that they are in a yellow or
Mhm.
they're in green. So you kind of know that this person could get triggered. And it's possible that their emotions may spike. So
Mhm.
what can another person do? So let's say John shares
Mhm.
that I'm in yellow, I'm in
Yeah.
red. What could Jane do to handle the situation?
So, the this is not, rocket science, but really it's breathing and pausing. The reality is that we have emotional reactions to things. And so when we go to that emotional place, we're not thinking rationally. So if in that moment you just take a pause, and there is a, connection between stimulus and response, and there is a pause between the two. And so I think just holding back and really listening to yourself. From my perspective, I also this is where your triggers can be very helpful, knowing what those triggers are. For example, I actually take some buffer between meetings so that I'm not rushing to a meeting and I'm not running late to a meeting, because I know one of my triggers is rushing to things. So I like being very planful, and I like to be able to think about the meeting beforehand, so I go into the meeting prepared. So that's one of the things I do. So I think doing things proactively, I think, is really helpful. So that individual knowing their triggers, knowing the ways that the instances where they typically could get into the yellow, and trying to prevent that. But if they're in the yellow, just pausing as much as possible, breathing as much as possible, buying some time. So I encourage people, just to bring a drink of water or something like that and just take a drink, before they actually, say anything or react to anything. Some people who are introverts will write things down first before they actually say them. And then also too, sometimes if you get an email you don't like, you can also just send the email back saying received, we'll get back to you tomorrow. I'm
Mhm.
also a big fan of, if there's an email you need to send and there's a little bit of an edge to it, wait till the next day. And most of the time, you're not going to feel the same energy around that relationship the next day as you did in that moment. So we
Mm.
instantly go to that hot moment. I studied under behavioral economist Dan Ariely at Duke, and he talks about those hot moments. And so typically we shift away from those with time. So just giving your body time to get past the emotional reaction and get back to the rational mind would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, powerful. Thank you for sharing. You also talk about social awareness, Suzanne.
Mhm.
And so many times, what happens is, regardless wherever you are at, like, you step into the Zoom room or the actual room, there can be different virtual environments, hybrid environments, and cues are so much harder to see.
That's
So, what
right.
are some of the ways leaders can better read the room?
I love this one because, to me, this gets back to, how do you build a team? So
Mhm.
leaders are definitely individual workers, but as they move into leadership role, they're actually being asked to be group workers and bringing groups of people together and getting them to agree upon an idea and then move together on that idea. So particularly in the hybrid situation post COVID, we have teams all over the world. And so how do you build that instant connection? So the first thing I always recommend to people is icebreakers. And I know people think they take too much time, but the reality is, kind of getting that early connection with people is very helpful. So 2 days ago, when I did a training on design thinking, I just had people kind of share the emotion that they had, but I also had them pair it with a noun. And the thing that it did is actually force people to listen. So, hi, I'm Suzanne, and I'm excited like electricity, or I'm sleepy like a bear. And it's interesting because you're connected to the adjective, and so you feel that emotion, but for whatever reason, connecting it to a noun, people pay more attention to it. And you hear giggles around the room, and you hear different things. And that kind of connection brings people together. And you actually feel it over Zoom as well. And then people are starting to use their emojis and they're connecting with people. And you just know that this person's tired, or because they have a baby. And so you're going to, be not as, requiring as much of them in that situation. Or if someone's really excitable because they're excited about this situation. And so I think a good icebreaker is a good way to go. And on my website, socialimpactarchitects.com, we've got lots of different icebreakers we use, just to get people kind of brought into the room and connected to thinking about the purpose of the meeting today. So pushing past the meeting they came from, or whatever situation they were in before, and getting them connected to being in a team in that moment. And then the second thing that we try to do is get people to participate. So the brainstorming process, so finding ways, through design boards online, jam boards, getting people to connect with post-it notes, to get them involved in the conversation. And then a voting process. So, how are they voting to make sure that the idea that is the best idea kind of wins out? And so, using kind of group facilitation tools, and there's just as many online as there are in person to really help people contribute to the group process and then feel like they now own that process because it's been something that they've worked on together as a team.
Mm, love that, especially with the noun sleepy
Uh-huh.
there. It just
So what
gives
is yours today? What would your adjective and noun be?
that's a really good thing. You're putting me in the hot seat. So here's what I would say. Well, I would say that I'm excited as a new bird flying off the nest.
That's a good one. That's a really good one.
Because I love learning. And as you're talking about it, knowledge gets me excited. And it's not just about the knowledge, but it's like, how can I use? Because that's the beauty of these conversations. With every conversation, I'm growing and I'm learning, and then I'm able to pass that on to my clients or to my workshops and the teams that I work with. So that is beautiful. So now kind of think about it, right? Let's say you talked about building the teams, and as a leader, you may find that somebody's checked out or feels misunderstood or unheard. How can a leader pick on those subtle cues? Because there are a lot of people who don't want to say anything because they don't want to be seen as weak or like, oh, I'm not able to handle the stress.
Mhm.
Or like, this could go against my promotion or something like that. So, what are some of the subtle cues?
Yeah. So I kind of call these cat cues. If you've got a cat, you know that cats are very good at telegraphing to you what their needs are. So if they want to be quiet, they want to be quiet. If they want attention, they want attention. And if they want food, they're going to actually vocalize it. So I do think that for me, I pay attention to past behavior and, have they always been quiet? And so if they're always a quiet person, then it's really about trying to build kind of ways in that group process so that they can be heard. So, one of the things I do is I usually send the agenda out ahead of time. Most of those people like to process ahead of time. So, any activity that we're going to do, I'll kind of telegraph ahead of time like, this is the activity we're going to do. You're going to get some time in the meeting to actually think about it before you have to speak. But if they are unusually quiet, as an example, and they're coming into the room and they're quiet, to me that's really an opportunity to check in with them because they're probably in the red or the yellow. And so I probably would not poke the cat at that time. I probably would check in with them and just say, tell me what's going on for you. And it could be a situation that they have going on personally. It could be related to the process. Maybe they're in the minority view and they feel like the direction we're going is too fast or too slow. And so sometimes those cues I think are really helpful to remind me as a leader that everybody's input really matters. All the research and group process shows that the more diverse a group is, the better. But there is such a thing as groupthink, and people will all of a sudden get onto an idea, and you can have alignment almost too quickly. We call it go fever. In the entrepreneurial area, where you get this go fever, and you don't allow for outside voices. So
Mhm.
sometimes I'll also use techniques around devil's advocate. So making sure that any negative ideas or any challenging or risk ideas get to come into the room too, because it could be that that person's withdrawn because they don't feel like their voice is heard. And so I usually do it from a positive perspective and kind of make fun of it, saying what could go terribly wrong with this idea versus, tell me all the challenges. So I don't put that person in a role of being a negative Nancy, so to speak, and allow people to share like what could go wrong with this idea, um, or what are some of the key risks that we need to mitigate with this idea as a company or as an individual. So typically if someone's acting unusual in their behavior, I'll check in with them, but I'll also try to use group facilitation techniques to try to pinpoint kind of why they're different than normal. um, and so that's kind of my ways of kind of getting underneath the surface of what's going on.
Yeah, it's very powerful because what you're doing is you're not just kind of putting them on spot that, hey, you're not feeling good, because that could lead them to making uncomfortable, versus you're just kind of checking in,
Mhm.
which creates that safe space for them to open up.
Mhm.
And as you're talking about, this is again, you're creating influence.
Mhm.
And influence is about alignment.
Mhm.
And when we talk about alignment, let's say you're in a tough meeting or a cross functional decision, and the emotions are running high. The room, whether it's Zoom room or real room, it's emotionally charged. So, what would that alignment look like in such a situation?
So I think for me, it would be really mapping the room and understanding where people are on certain
Mhm.
elements of this, and allowing people to speak to whatever is concerning to them. Again, it's a group process. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll ask them to put on a post-it note. Sometimes I'll also call a spade and have the tough conversation myself. If I feel like the room isn't moving, or I feel like the room needs an opportunity to kind of give voice. And so that's really what leaders do. It's not a comfortable situation sometimes. Leaders oftentimes have to, you know, push into the discomfort that the group is feeling, and really allow people to kind of share where their biggest concerns are. And so typically the groups I work with, they have ground rules, they have group processes already. And so part of what I'll push them back to is, we have a group process around, rumbling. And so rumbling is this idea that, we try to work through issues that we don't have agreement on. And so everybody gets a voice, everybody gets a chance to kind of share their view, and then really, coming to some type of a conclusion together. And so typically what I find in those situations is that people are just misjudging the situation, or they're moving towards feelings around things versus the facts. And so sometimes I'll also even call a timeout on the conversation and say, what are some of the big questions we have about this decision? And we're going to come back to it in a week. And let's gather more facts, because oftentimes people have disagreement more around the emotions of a decision versus the facts and the rational side. And that's usually where they're miscuing, is that different people have different facts. The CFO will look at it from a different fact base than a program staff member or the CEO will. And so if they each share the facts that they know, then oftentimes they'll understand where the conflict exists.
Hmm. Absolutely. And so many times what happens is there can be some pushing and posturing. So, have you ever experienced a case where it was going on and you kind of like quietened the situation and you helped leaders build a buy-in?
Yes. So that's actually one of the hallmarks of our strategic planning process, is really building a process where it's bottom up. So we are moving away from a more hierarchical structure where the top really decides things, to a structure where more people want to be part of the process. So I tell leaders right now that the Gen Z students I have, from day one, they believe they're a leader. And so
Mhm.
they want to be part of the process of building a strategic plan, building values, building a culture. And so inviting them to be part of the process, building a planning process that actually allows for input along the way. So that opportunity to brainstorm really big, and then over time kind of converge to where are we going to focus our time and energy, and really suggest the priorities for the organization, allows individuals to have had the opportunity to give input, see where the priorities oftentimes have had to make choices, the tension around not being able to do everything, and knowing that they're in the minority associated with certain things. Another technique that I use is fist to five. And I've been actually using this with policymakers too. And so it's fist to five. And so everybody in the room actually votes on where they are on the idea. So fist means I'm totally against it, I think it's terrible. And then you've got one and two, and they basically mean that I'm against it, I think it's a terrible idea. Three kind of means I'm in between, I'm not really sure. Four and five means I actually really support this idea. So what I often will do is have people give me a sense of where they are. And everybody has to vote with their hand. And we get a sense of, is there consensus in the room that it's a bad idea, or consensus in the room that there's a good idea? And so I check in with the minority view and say, tell me why you think this is a bad idea, or tell me why you think this is a good idea. And again, you're really talking about facts at that time. And so someone who thinks it's a bad idea may say, well, we've got 5 big priorities right now, and it is the end of 2025. How are we going to get them all done? And the CEO
Mhm.
can say, what are those 5 priorities? And let me shift some of them to 2026 then, because this thing is really important. So it's really getting to the heart of where the conflict is. And again, why people kind of feel the way they do, with the hope that you move the group to all 4s and 5s. And then you're moving the group process to a place where everybody intellectually and emotionally believe that the decision is the right decision for the organization. And you're not going to get everybody, but if you can at least get the majority in that direction, I think you can get to a good group process.
Very powerful, Suzanne. And you talk about your 4-part EQ, which is the emotional intelligence
Mhm.
framework. Can you share with our listeners and audience very quickly about it?
Yeah. So the first is kind of social, for you to think about it from a self perspective. And so you've got self awareness, and then you've got self regulation. And so those are kind of the baseline levels. And the better you are at that, the better you are at really understanding other people. And so then you shift into social awareness and social influence. And so you're really thinking about awareness at the very top, social as well as self. And then you're really thinking about management and how to kind of manage and lead associated with regulation and then influence. And so those are kind of the quadrants we look at. And one of the things I do in trainings is allow people to kind of vote on which area is their strength. Most people will put self-awareness as their highest strength. I just did a law firm a couple of weeks ago. And then the one that people have the most weakness to is usually self-regulation,
Mhm.
because they feel like that's an area where they need more tools, they need more techniques around self-regulation. Sometimes social influence. So social influence is one where we get into things like executive presence, how you actually kind of can move a room. And so social awareness is reading the room. Social influence then is how do you move the room? How do you get people to kind of shift? I call them, if you're a Star Wars fan, I call them the Jedi mind tricks. Like, how do you get people to move? And the things you can do to kind of influence them to follow you or to follow the idea.
Yeah, no, definitely. And at the core of all of these things, as you have talked about self regulation and self awareness, decision comes, right? In today's world, there are so many options, and so many people get caught in
Mhm.
paralysis analysis. So,
Mhm.
during that decision fatigue, I mean, that is real. So, how could people use, even if it's a 1 or 2 skills, to work through that situations?
So, couple things. One is just knowing where you are and where your triggers are. And so, I recommend people not make a decision when they're in the red or the yellow themselves. That's not typically going to be a good decision. It's going to really come from an emotional space, and our brains are just not functioning at a high level at that place. So, we really try to flip people to a much more rational level. And so, what I typically tell my students, as well as the executives, is really good decisions are an alignment between your head, your heart, and your gut. And so, your head is really the rational side. So, have you done your due diligence? Have you, checked in with people? Have you talked to other people who've had this decision? So making sure that you're gathering all the information that you can to make a rational decision. Your heart is really connected to, does this feel good? How is this going to affect other people? It's really connected to your ethics, your purpose. Those are the things that it just feels like it's the right decision. And then your gut is connected to your values. Is it in alignment with your values, whether it's your organizational values or your individual values or both? Um, and for me, if I have alignment between those three, I have a pretty good confidence level that the decision's a good decision. And so sometimes that takes a while. I have to gather more information or I have to talk to other people. Or if it doesn't feel right to me in my gut, usually I have to go back and look at my values and see what value am I forfeiting to do this thing? And is that the right decision for me? So I think for me, I always recommend kind of a connection between head, heart, and gut.
Yeah, no, definitely. It addresses all the key areas. And so this way you can create as much as you can in the moment, regret proof, because
Mhm.
a lot of my clients will come and say, what? But I don't want to waste my time. And how can I make it regret proof? And there's only so much you can make. And it's also allowing yourself that space to fail. So I've
Mhm.
thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Suzanne. How can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
So I've my business website is called socialimpactarchitects.com. We've got all sorts of different resources there. I actually have a weekly blog on Substack that is one of the top blogs on social change. And so we have a whole different blog every single week. In fact, we had in the month of August, we did a special edition on emotional intelligence and took each of these. And so if you're interested in learning a bit more tips and tricks, and also how you can actually incorporate this into your workplace. And because I typically work with nonprofits, they're all free of charge. They're all things that I have tried with my clients. And so, there's doesn't cost you anything to do red, yellow, green. It doesn't cost anything to do icebreakers. It doesn't cost anything to do kind of group facilitation. And so I give you my best techniques and tools that I've used with my clients, or even I use myself to self-regulate in those blogs. And so we can put that in the show notes and people can go directly there if they want to read a bit more about each of them individually.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Any last words for our audience?
I think to me, this is just something to continue to explore. People think you either have emotional intelligence or you don't. And to me, it's a muscle that you develop over time. Every day I get better, just like my dad said. What are you going to do differently tomorrow? And so you're going to have a bad day every once in a while where something gets to you, and it's your opportunity to kind of analyze that situation and see what can I do better differently tomorrow. And so just to be kind to yourself, give yourself grace, give other people's grace as well, and then use those opportunities for those connections to learn more about yourself as well as other people.
That's such a beautiful word. Where we can end is grace, giving yourself grace,
Yeah.
giving others grace, because this is a lifelong journey. It's not just
Mhm.
about like, you're one and done.
Mhm.
Leaving room, because I'm not going to speak for anyone else. For me, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And that there is more to learn. And
Mhm.
mastery is not just having the knowledge and the experience, mastery is also knowing that there can be more depths and bringing in that curiosity and openness to life and to yourself. So, thank you, Suzanne, for joining us and sharing your insights. We appreciate that. And thank you, wonderful audience, for being part of our journey, because without you, the show would not be possible. So reach out to us, let us know how we can serve and support you to live the life you deserve and live the life you want. And thank you, Juan, our tech wizard, for making the show possible. Take care and be well until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.